Just don't throw it away in case we get like sued later.
Well, it's in my wallet, so
okay.
I might have bigger problems if I lose that.
If you're worried about the camera, we all have consent forms.
I was not worried.
That's one thing if you'll call a cop on.
No, I won't.
Do something like that, be the most troll joke. Like, the second you piss me off, that camera's being used against me.
All right. Mike, right?
Yeah.
Let's do this.
Since the 70s, the war on drugs has proven a failed initiative that endures. Economic engagement in Mexico has only expanded the trafficking problem. The U.S. is crusading and intertwined with the economics of the drug wars. A fundamental shift in the way that sovereignty operates in the U.S.-Mexico border. Part of the war on drugs we introduced in the American Mexican by nation simultaneously forced the war on crime to emphasize radical terms, welfare, criminal justice, approaches emphasizing rehabilitation towards coercive penal governance response nationally and internationally. That the war on drugs is an overwhelming failure that does not reduce use, trafficking, or crime. Basking anatomy trafficking each year more efficient. The American border is crucial essential to for narcotics, war on drugs, resulting therefore in more reconfigurations of geographies of sovereignty, exceptional space along and beyond the border, keeping economics, homo sacrifice, human life against politicizing and dominating by suspension of Jordan Florida, sovereign powers, every clutch piece of exceptions, from the offended police themselves outside of the law, and these sovereignty have shifted through history, political landscape, especially intertwined economically with the drug war, in wars, transmitted techniques of sovereignty, space practice on the ground, how strict borders, legal are being nullified and subverted, legal approaches have failed cartels in subverting governmental sovereignty, whereas the sovereignty and transferred drug, underworld, Parker 11. Drug cartels that managed to exist in command from within inside the law and outside of the large regional sovereignty being subverted with physical spending national government, and the head of Mexico's national institute for combating drugs were arrested for accepting bribes, wars, cartel, and performing arrested him that sort of system of corruption resulting in being cast in the state of exception when churchill state and government parties capitulate. Conception understanding of sovereignty is changed. Sovereignty organizes itself as a machinery that authority which is sent through and structures territory capability cartels remain with seven headed formal rule laws and independent transformative sovereignty. The drug underworld wars law have been dominated, deemed obsolete as both the international and national governments have failed to enforce. And this transfer of sovereignty constitutes war as the space of exception and citizens' juridical values suspended by both cartels and state military forces. These categories become one and the same. Rule and exception become indistinguishable, which is an enabling condition for violence. Part 11. Juridical and unofficial transfer of sovereignty to the underworld will legitimize war as a space of exception and prolonged space between order and custody necessary to aimless practice employed by cartels to achieve a unique form of sovereignty in all realms of political, social, cultural, and economic have been targeted by narco-culture cartels have engaged sovereign rights sometimes the space of exception not chaos before order, but even from an order rising from suspension, increased violence themselves of suspension encourages cartels cartel sovereignty to pass local, national, third violence occurs where the exception to rule commit still with the violence used for reserved law, the authority used cartel the use sovereignty of drug cartels exert by using force result in the space of exception and the fact of sovereignty citizens psychological situation both fears that our cartels and military forces both sides have power to kill or obtain against one's rights with little impunity. Citizens' rights of assembly and expression is limited, mimicking illegal suspension of rights during a declared state of exception, and the violent political determination and threshold beyond which life ceases to have juridical value creates the category of bare life or to life devoid of value, which goes over to the biological body of every living being nullifies value to death. That's Agamben 98. Sovereignty to mean category of determination and threshold beyond which life ceases to have any value can therefore be killed. A new juridical category of life devoid that corresponds to the bare life of homo sapiens every realized state and every politicization of life and vice and concerning the threshold bound which I see to be politically relevant can be eliminated without penetrating society. It's limited to society size to win sacred will be bare life adults in the biological body of every living being. The impact is the sovereign's ability to exploit fundamental flaws in the legal system and continue the sovereign war through the balance side of the global countermovement against such violence. You should refuse the line Valley 13. We live in unprecedented time of crisis. Terrorism, global phenomenon, is becoming self-conscious. Struggle for full global anonymous wars. Always global terrorism becoming an instrument of racism. What is new is terrifying. The race and terrifying wars that have launching a proportion going on in this global content. Global sovereign target those who not belong to a count of race, class, gender, way of life, starving. Everybody was going to be killed without sacrifice. For not to fight to death. The fanatical self-serving tribes and the source of the crisis cannot be solved unless the struggle for dominance, limited struggle that applies to the global sovereign dispensing revolution against the paradigm of violence in nature of counter-rights on to use violence and want to turn the active stories back in tigers, great about Heinz and tigers, start possibly in New York and Oakland. People speak to the Lord of against the nobles. The other side, the reaction to prefer not to be down for not to be forced in the paradigm of violence with importance to the lead to war machine to police apparatus. The since the law be done in the true sense, the law can be recuperated. The law is also immediately ethics of sovereign will be brought to justice. The movement knows not want to be honest, not affect Europeans' characters and imperative to those who understand know and understand what they must revolt against the sovereign discourse. Interrogation of Juarez is a space of exception is valuable in its ability to foster the understanding of the operation and implication of such categories. Part 11. State of emergency following power governmental declaration may suspend or powers following disaster may be suspended by the ruling governmental sovereignty government whose space exception is based on which the event unfolded as exposed to actual declaration by the government in the situation injured both the U.S. Mexico and Mexican government opposing to declaring the state of emergency examination of warrants space exception important because it falls into both legal and theoretical definitions that can provide valuable information on the nature of states of emergency exception the legality of such categories and how the terms are extended and created in physical spaces. Representations and exposition are the organizing principles of the high debate which we can challenge to alter power government. Okay. Human beings separate image of the thing given because they want to recognize themselves. Human beings to transform the open and battlefield political struggle without court because human beings neither are nor have to be in essence. They are conditioned the most evident substantial task of political consequence is the task of political consequence appears itself to appear. State power is no longer found in the monopoly of the legitimate use of violence. It's found in the control of appearance and position transformed itself to value this accumulated images the new class of bureaucrats watches over its management. A theoretical thing concerning security, problematized militarized practice such as the war on drugs constitutes reality built in 5. Thinking differently about security involves curtailing the way security has been traditionally conceptualized parental approaches for problematized militarized practice and form by feeling discord call for reconceptualizing practice where thinking differently because rejecting the conception of theory as neutral and emphasizing the mutually constitutive relationship between theory and practice the way that community students think they're right about security privileges certain practices while marginalizing are there for helping constitute reality. Our affirmation is a form of play that liberates debate from rigid rules and catches humanity from the sacred to go to innate. Agamben considered play most born of yoga and that can profane is what is sacred, that forcing each to regain its political necessity. The Russian European thought power rises to common pattern embrace place as world before its passing. It's American mood future life in the fame of game and not play life, where play is found expectation of entertainment, complex wars, game and old metaphor, being false by images of clean pure war, against city using power to win a war, and ideas having been into his place, making credits here, some academic, social, political, and economic value to replace proposally, sacrificing distant currents, hierarchical side forms, rules need to be broken, freedom can be regained by those who play with games from play you can see through, and reverse them, place them beside the fact that that's community for the sake of play, we need to liberate self, one shot deny, play this lead you to cancellation, one should profane, and fast to break the rules are going to happen through play itself, through interpreting the future today, being wiped out this active as raising the words for resigning plate's capacity to kill my passage for true life and truth and predictability are nihilistic illusions built upon a myth of sameness and unity regarding the fear of flux and movement, which lie at the heart of life, which embrace the ecstasy of verse and the glory of active interpretation, which is forced to rest meaning from the abyss of nihilism, logic, or one. Elusive truth of no nihilistic heart is not bound to be simply negative, historical belief, logic, space fiction, is predictability occurrence of the same synaptic force instruction will lead you to evaluation to read text and undergoes interpretation, hardly possible use of creative forces to quick values of greater impulse to the word, the weakness, or the greater impulse to differentiation, no more force, resist the false neutrality of science, and sign of climate change, so the truth reaction interpretation ensues, fabricated weapons, different opposite subject, cause, effect, means, and the time to convention, latency, what I know in advance, great God, that plenty force, plain text, is torpor, direct accumulation to reinvent the intensity of verse and refusing attempts to reform the legal system, doom it to its own nihilistic destruction, misuse all conceptual apparatuses of capture cause Roman 10. We must always rest for all apparatuses the possibility of views that they have captured to achieve right subtraction of ourselves from it. These apparatuses and belief that may jam and operative apparatus such as nihilism prepare the demise by making all positive forms of life they govern and increase in running and capable of inflicting death or doing nothing can conceal for centuries. Ideology this is the original inoperativity that was fully unveiled in the contemporary crisis that manifests in the operative character by political apparatus in themselves. It was heaven for the first world nation take for granted basically all people the earth have gone bankrupt and destructive nihilistic driven by political machine as itself found all the work and empty out positive forms of life that lead to humanity state destitution gone in terms bare life is representative conditions the emergence of the subject becoming politics, bare life is must be transformed instead of constitution, installation of former life is wholly exhausting, bare life its own bias of its own, so the happy former life is nothing, but bare life is no longer separated. But between the degraded bias and the apparatus and the changes to the functions as their foundation, bare life is reappropriated as whatever singularity its own, thus at its own the dwelling of humanity, and the reducibly potential, whatever being the possibility of birth to the non-exclusive community in which God finds the possibility of a happy life rather than seek to reform the apparatus. We should simply leave them to their self-destruction and only try to reclaim the bare life that they feed on.
Ballot.
Sure. So we think that ballots, so I guess the text is, the role of the ballot should affirm the team who best activates agency to resist sovereignty.
How do you activate agency to resist sovereignty?
Yeah, so we think that the one you see is a discursive and performative criticism of sovereign discourse as it exists broadly and in the context of debate. And we will make, if you want me to describe how sovereign discourse
I'm more
exists.
curious as to what new discourse that you reveal that isn't already known.
What do you mean?
As
It's not like, it's not just about the revelation of knowledge, but rather discursive criticism.
Okay, what's the difference between revelation and discursive criticism?
So like, revelation of knowledge is just like stating things. The one AC is more than just like a statement of things. But rather it's a discursive way of resisting sovereignty that the Guertin evidence describes that within the rules that we have been thrown into, we must resist sovereign discourse in the
we, as the negative, need to disprove to win this debate?
I mean, there are like, you could probably prove that sovereignty is not even starting point, or like the method of the one you see is not even.
What is your method?
So aside from like the discursive stuff I already described, the piece of Guertin evidence that we describes the way that play operates in challenging traditional European understandings of rationality and truth that have shaped violent forms of knowledge. Our argument is that the one you see.
Why do violent forms of knowledge exist? Like, who thinks the drug wars are a good thing that's not based off the sovereign?
Who thinks it is a good thing?
Yeah,
So like, our argument is that sovereign and militarized discourse exists in debate, right? The way that like a majority of people who read Mexico Asset approach the topic relies on a militarized understanding of the war on drugs that also characterizes other forms of debate. Like,
why are people in Juarez killed?
Why? Our argument is that I guess violence and power, form of power relations is organized by sovereignty.
Organized by sovereignty. So who are the villains?
Who are the villains?
Yeah.
I guess like our evidence describes that sovereign power exists both in state military forces but also cartels.
Is everyone affected by the sovereign power?
I guess affected differently, yes. Or yes, everyone is affected, but affected differently.
Okay. Why did the war on drugs fail?
Why does the war on drugs fail?
Yeah.
Sure, so the first piece of Park evidence you read is very good, and it says that there's a structural contradiction in the interests of sovereign power, which is, our evidence describes contradictions between neoliberal policies such as NAFTA and militarized policies that seek to achieve security.
Okay,
it says that NAFTA made trafficking easier and more efficient and undermined militarized efforts.
If we can win that the drug war was a success, do you win?
I mean, if you win the war on drugs is a good thing, you probably win.
That's not my question. Could you name a drug cartel?
A drug cartel? I think our evidence, a specific name of one?
Yeah. Who's a drug cartel?
Like our evidence describes multiple different groups that operate in Juarez.
Yeah, name them.
It says.
Hold on, it's
Yeah, we can see that somewhere. Eventually.
in our speeches.
Hey, your question is charging.
What am I?
Never mind, not anymore.
Two off.
It's right there.
I'm just good.
Yeah.
All right.
First off, it's black framework. The one you see is a stance against political activity. Instead, call for a valve can Hegel who toppled Czechoslovakia to totalitarian regime with moral and political activism. The present day can be toppled, but only with a political strategy. Capitalism 96 supreme lesson for intellectually possible to bring down the totalitarian regime. But if I was track for radiation, caution is not possible. If we know the history of revolutions, that don't want to happen ever. We're only give political activism, intellectual form that the consensus developed. Liberating philosophy, the political mobilized up to really explain and develop revolution. Hegel reacted to the logical practical political strategy. Now, two advanced. First is racial pragmatism, avoiding discussion, political reverse back to historical discriminatory educational practice of the task. Once in 33 legal time of back to knowledge of required political matter analysis, do not think environmental alignment. The world legal sort of supposed to discuss the issue of the day after 3 terms of world content, believe nation, new world is supposed to tell people politics, the office, and putting equal message or another point of tax, the egos or the legals or having favorable parties which do so much for the race and diversity. See institution, age, education, again through the policies of racial exclusion. Once in 33 eventually introduced legislation to have the constitution of 19 thus creating the school history, the bill to go by someone who made it a point that would never do to have the legal study the constitution. Like an exterior structure, they never conform to the policy of keeping the legal and displaying. Now the second impact is actually trusted and never without it. We must prioritize moral engagement than 1096. Is it possible to bring down the totalitarian regime by violent or gradual transformation? Because it is not possible if we know that revolution won't happen without a moral engagement, political act, and intellectual regime. Cultivates intellectual forming unified fraction of the politics of today's civilization has any soul which role that holds life in a human spirit. If we do not destroy, wish to destroy ourselves, we're dying of hunger, which is so if we do want people go definitely hungry and suffocating the global greenhouse. We must come to our senses, we must come together and mobilize human human conscience, human mind, spirit, human responsibility, human reason, the political is in that we can't avoid it. Candles in 96, we can choose to stay out, public to stand down, we're going to support and collaborate, Gaussian house, the person, we're going to move out to a total by the party in the state, produce housing and more other, and Yugoslavia, we cannot evade the full way the consequence of our choices. Our alternative is infiltration, engage the opposite. Present institution was planning tactics to take it down. Williams and Centennial, one single one council from the political center to try to power over environmental change, versus its radar to protect the opportunity to join band government organ power. Nothing should be equipped with some method of the president can't be available, no effective struggle plan, tax plan analysis, subject to the application, mental analysis, the every plan to organs established now. Our alternative solves reparations, but we pay for the war against drugs as intellectual. We must highlight such accountability. Washington 12, been as the government official playing a direct role in the creation of this methodological argument for reparation. The United States has spent more than $1 trillion waging the war. Funds that have been used for education, job creation, I said already, it's reasonable for $1 trillion for the paper to repair the job. The reparation to take up for the best name defended the school and community like the trouble and well payment. Individual values should have to join the fact that and to refuse to take responsibilities. Does that mean that you should have a highlight accountability and people's racial so that people responsibility for doing a committed past time to play for the election and position every opponent. Now they don't have an advocate tax, that's a voting issue. They can't solve without a methodology. Their relevant doesn't specify any course of action. The undermines necessary strategies to fight against oppression and prevents them becoming effective advocate. If you saw point 2 shifting the bed does not let the negative agent is that like which methodology is better course of action. That is the logic of white supremacy used to try to the methodology. This is an independent reason they should not be allowed the permutation. Now counteradvocacy, yeah, I joined debate to get rid of my speech until it looks like that's gone, but I'm still stuck in Esau. I'm starting out going 3-3 at 20 points. No one recognized me to become a Centennial KK. The people point to say, oh, look at those Koreans learning to debate so well, working so hard, my hard work coming through assimilating into a traditional form of debate has turned me into a small minority. This year I choose to engage through who I am, through my experience with diversity, and the exposure of non-traditional argument. Michael and I embrace the counter methodology to expose the myth of the modern theory across the conscientization. This isn't your normal Asian counter-acting to Asian identity and discrimination against Asians, and that's their interrogation to get the heart and root of the drug war. Centennial 12, the history foundation of modern drug war has been the roots in colonialism and racism, which have been traced back to the animosity directly against South Asian people. Critics supported cultural practice and agency conducting opportunity questioning the principle, which is unfortunately behind the guard enterprise of youth prison population. We must get to the heart of the drug war, the way we immigrants and detectives have links to the political situation, masculinization, suppression, academy use, tactic based on colonialism, a significant portrait which was directed against South Asian. Now, this is a new race that had manifested itself in the myth of the modern minority, the myth of portraying Asian Americans solely as hardworking, a methodology focused on Asian body. Exposure the myth is critical. There are 3 impacts. 1, the oppression of the Asian Americans continue. 2, the Asian body is justified to the oppression of all the minority. 3, a representative tension created between minority and China. 93, modern minority image or portraying hardworking, intelligent stuff, but leaving the modern minority justified ignoring the unique discrimination faced by Asian American cultural privilege to general public to know you can find a Puerto Rican minority pulling itself from hardship to modern minority and logically question out. So, Semitic colors, social surveillance, what can see the level of tool of pressure with the discrimination against Asian religion, mindset, oppression, the race line, the mistake, subject of all the bills inside outside the Asian American community, the clean all the audience on sympathy to the problem of Asian American, the Asian American, the official design and funding for social service programs called the mystery, exclude the Asian American student from opportunity for the income disparity for all the Asian American students, more glamorous Asian American family, have more work for more Asian American women that are built to work because of their mom, family or in such a low wage, mythology, watch to come back really, the racial minority for white or black for not being except for the African American, the Latino, the poor, such a look at the Asian, anyone can make it into this country, it's justified by media, ocracy, the pressure of racial minorities, creates risk against Asian American minority services, communities, people, Korean media. In Los Angeles, discovered the many Korean Americans have used of the human shield accomplishment in majority in the anger of the black minority and our performance of conscientization, a process named the world results in real world change. It was achievement to the center conscientization began to leave the world meaningful education to recognize the impacts on our force of oppression have on life, the process and also conscientization of maintained with us. We move about the world, promotes recognition of the world as dynamically and making self-recognition, also inspire people to work against oppression. In their active efforts to transform the world, the world is important steps to accomplishing our focus on race is uniquely good. First, your rhetorical silence. Dr. Crenshaw, 97, the ideological white privilege offers the rhetorical silence. He lost all to the rhetorical silence around white kids are capable of social protecting white privilege silence. I cannot pass it. He after the speech about white kids line the exists in our discourse signifying the extent of the show soon or sensitive but the higher structure actually the speech now race is now the only means for the sovereign to justify the killings of many and O2 by Baltic towns to kill is inflict on all the living about by use of race interviews to protect the emerging black power because it's within the state of the logical race and race and France condition for example death race is indispensable death the homicide function of the state can only be assured that race is the race and by which power becomes spiral when civil society race and normalized race makes the more permanent conditions of man whether the death and torture race makes it killing the other and everything occurs by internalized normalized the work gets into anger and that critique turns the alternative logic race and justifies the one impacts of Okajima by the logical race and makes killing a simple and modern day pile of political the only reason can justify the worst function of the achievements the only way to stop power right to kill can be achieved by political and race and battle up with extent to stop power race must be protected every instant by in 2000 struggle against race and develop take up the 60% to accept the race university the fear and justice of violence, one can't find a world let alone legislation or because racist the exclusion of the other are subject to violent dominant operations and dangerous violence and also just as I consider itself in the seats of its own that's a feudal race in condition for all morality, ethical choice, connected political choice, and the principles not accept only conflict violence and torture will be allowed. Going to case, there is no impact to better life shorts and no five violence can be less dangerous for national business suffer. Decline thanks to the price of natural data, natural culture, and giving way to plurals. I didn't know it was very sharp by every identification by a political program that been bad term their performance is bad because they call for a ballot which seems a revolution pretends to the sovereignty of the judge Campbell. 98 idealization speech and some negative principles idealization some power of state which every ideological citizen domain of power second speech and routine the power which is sustained topic conceded judicial argument because linguistic for sovereign something as a one good and vulnerable every first sovereign in this power turns this good back to object and narration. The first link is to pass the knowledge consumption. They produce something of people in Juarez to our object for pleasure. Bourgeois 94 care really capital what's our personal value remote to national material equivalent oil deposit spiritual raw materials which we people side law and nourishment people discovering response and catastrophe all the people destitute we're going to venture care about terrible inventive to stop the wind supernature we are just catastrophe moving spectacle of our affection leaving security condition of protection disaster sure goes on now. Second is the link from a view from nowhere. This is Johnson to that fine philosophy body self-action and team level to theory superfluous conversing one to the surface we are told from nowhere the voice of philosophy to for all of us with health nature is race identity when author from the author from the way everyone in power theory one with the power of become lost to oneself and this type of objective ethics calls callous advocacy which justifies atrocities no mediatorial and detective hold up the philosophy external violence valorization which we distant from one of subsequent objects and we become distant or get distance.
What's the status of the advocacy?
The status quo is always a logical.
Okay. Why is the 1AC mutually exclusive with a political strategy of infiltration?
Your partner card, legal institutions have failed. We say that you should demand a political action.
It says that legal solutions have failed. Why is that the same thing as reformism? Why is that the same thing as infiltration?
Your preserve card refusing attempts to reform the legal system.
Why is reformist politics the same as like infiltration? And then what
you
describe as
literally said doom is to its own nihilistic destruction. Don't touch it. That's the antithesis of the alternative.
Sure. I guess the counteradvocacy. I guess what are the roots of the war on drugs in Juarez related to? I guess
discrimination against Southeast.
Yeah, can you explain that?
Immigrants came over here. You heard like Chinese opiate use. The drug war was justified to oppress brown and yellow bodies. The immigrants were a justification that tied racism and colonialism into the drug war, justified us.
Okay, so it's founded in colonialism.
Not colonialism. Colonialism against immigrants, specifically from Southeast Asia. Differentialist racism.
Okay, so the Baudrillard evidence, it describes the way that the media uses images of suffering to achieve like psychological nourishment.
Yeah.
And it's grounded in like the psychoanalytic idea of like jouissance. I guess,
I would say that
why is the one you see that?
I would say that Baudrillard is talking about charity cannibalism, use of suffering in the people Juarez, my bad, is akin to the media using the poverty of someone in Africa to be like, oh, look, we should help these
Why are
people.
those
Let's
two
feel
things
good
the
about
same?
ourselves. What?
Why are those two things the same?
I just explained it. You're using the suffering of Juarez as a means to invoke, I guess, pesos into judge to get you to vote for them.
Okay. The Gully evidence describes that the way that modern sovereignty operates is that it sacrifices life, or it destroys life that cannot be sacrificed along the lines of race, class, and gender. And it describes that modern sovereignty is an instrument of racism. So why was the 1AC rhetorically silent on that?
We would say that's the opposite. Your 1AC control that nothing
Those are like
black and
lines
brown
on
people.
cards.
We say that the drug war is based on the oppression of the brown people in Mexico. The fact that you don't talk about these sovereignties, which is a
Those are lines from the Gully card.
And even if that's true, our mediated cards we read on the counter-advocacy says that no, it's not
Yeah,
sovereignty
but
that
why was
causes
the
racism.
1AC silent?
But the only
That's what the Crenshaw
They
card is about.
interrogate Juarez, the drug war. You're silent on the questions of race in there. Like just because you have.
Why is that
like,
true, given that the Gully card's like, this is an issue of race and sovereignty?
No, the Gully card's not. The Gully card goes the other way. The Gully card says that race is an instrument for biopolitics to operate. Without that, that means
This racist and terrifying war. There's a cleansing of immense proportion going on, an instrument of racism.
Yeah, so why
are
talk
we
about
silent?
the race in the drug war?
We're not silent on the issue of race. That doesn't make sense.
Okay, we'll take a little bit of a minute.
Yeah, okay, let me, so one thing I want you to look at. Sure.
Okay, stop crowd. It'll be case. So, okay. I mean, I'm reading I have arguments for reading all the half-ballot stuff on the Okay. So it'll be, like I said, case, then be a black framework, and then the counteradvocacy. You don't mind things are staying.
Good, I did that actually on it.
Whatever you're doing. Anybody not ready?
The role of the ballot is to act as an agency to disrupt sovereignty. The war on drugs pervades the public sphere, overdetermining the field of drug trafficking and underpinning our relationship with Mexico's sovereignty. And Juarez has undergone a shift from drug cartels who operate simultaneously inside and outside of law populations. They say two-sided attack is the rule of accepting of an indistinguishable ability to determine life that it makes. The reduction of entire globe to bare life and inevitability, the spectrum of catastrophe haunts as the camp expands globally, revealing the insidiousness on the other side of power. The affirmative is simultaneously radical active passivity that withdraws from the law to jam. The sovereign apparatus and a distant act to play that joins global counter movement against the violence of legalism. The ballot functions to privilege certain knowledge and debate. Voting affirmative disrupts status quo complicity with hegemonic sovereign logic. All of this just proves their first argument that there's no impact of bare life. The impact of bare life is all of the impacts of one he isolates with sovereign's ability to determine which life is valuable is the precondition for all forms of violence. It's the mechanism by which all of the violence of one describes operates. So the next argument is that an half ballot falls in the hands of the sovereign because the judge is the sovereign of this analogy doesn't make any sense. Even if the judge is the sovereign, an affirmative ballot is key. If the judge is the sovereign, you voting negative would presume that us capitulating and you voting negative would presume that we think that we are powerless in the face of the sovereign, that we should just let the sovereign kill us. That is not our argument. Our argument is not that we should be subject to the sovereign, but rather that we need to resist sovereignty. The judge, as a sovereign debate voting affirmative, would be the ultimate rejection of sovereign logic and dismantle it and turn it on its head. It would be the kind of play that our Guertin evidence talks about. Now their next argument is on images of suffering, but ignoring images of suffering degrades ethics and legitimize the worst forms of violence. On fact, 3 seems good itself to acknowledge how much suffering there is. Where the one has the right to ignorance or amnesia. There's the best representation image that makes it harder to maintain moral effectiveness, even only hoping they will perform. But the images say that what human beings are capable of doing. Remember the ethical actions, ethical balance, and self-memory, so only they can have. And heartlessness and amnesia go together. And there's no link to this argument anyway, because we don't actually isolate any specific images of suffering that would evoke pity. Just because we talk about Juarez as a space for interrogation doesn't mean that we are trying to evoke pity in the audience, and ignoring suffering elsewhere should be rejected. It's specific to their voter arguments. How should be too local, partisan particulars, ignores the plight of those outside their immediate sphere, only offering things for those who suffer from geographical, cultural, familial proximity. To ignore what is happening in the world becomes politically apathetic until someone closest touched by the war. The politics of pity is different than the politics of justice. Justice stands for resolution of disputes and common understanding of fairness and suffering wants to incite the reader imagine the possibility of action and historical conjuncture. There is no shouting out of degradation and intellectual debates and trade media movement. This politics of pity and justice were rooted in demand for social justice. Those who are affected by hardship and adherence to the problem of dealing with suffering and distance, contemporary meaning their event or cause, negation their political moral necessity, open up commitment to some kind of action, speech and action, cannot be by action distinct throughout the Guertin as act and mode regard blurs distinctions, holding the order of action arms like making illusionary positioning, every and act nothing, the naive illusion, creating an empire of suspicion, market suspicion. Their next argument is a view from nowhere, but debate should be a space of political contestation, which argument, there's no link to the view from nowhere argument because we recognize our position as debaters. Our glee evidence says that we need to work in the positions we are thrown into and we need to reject sovereign logic and debate. Now, debate should be a space for political contestation.
Okay.
Their argument is strategy of police as Centennial and 13 police officers may be able to deception and averting such an immediate consequence of nuisance of passports containing precise descriptions of means controlling mobility apparatus strict prevention of category of population of police could be reduced to a single principle, make it simple question: who are you? The passport makes it possible to found immediately and without ambiguity. Given a body, find its name. Given a name, find its body. Given a set of printed property, sign the name. Locate the corresponding body. The goal above to acquire by power to capture. There's going to be no concealed piece of appears imperative security agent and moving can be strictly controlled. Black Kramer. There's no link to this argument. We don't go into discussion of the topic. We just have a different interpretation of what it means. Resolve means to reduce through mental analysis. Random approach engineering 6 result in terms of reducing mental analysis. And there, Woodson evidence describes forbidding blacks from discussing certain issues. It makes no sense in the context of the debate. First is we're not black. What Mike and I choose to discuss doesn't prescribe what others should be talking about. And second, this can only link to them because Centennial is the only team in Toronto for putting parameters on what debate education should be. Now, the affirmative should be allowed to have a discussion about the topic rather than a topical discussion, which means that we are prescribing what people should say, and even if the state is valuable, and most of the arguments that here are pertaining to using the state, but even if the state is valuable in some way, inviting oppression, it's not a reason that we as individuals should be prescribing state action. You should be an informed citizen, not the government. They should have critical thinking and deliberation, steal, and how can academic intellectual truth primary should not be to develop a research program that be employed by students of world politics, must avoid which governments want intellectual to put yourself in our place and tell us what you would do. This is not a question one has to answer to make a decision on any matter. This will become used for the mechanisms to control academic intellectual creation. Suggestions that the academic should use their position to play the role of prejudice, which what the president needs is an intellectual who dares to remind him or her of the brittleness of power of its limits and pitfalls. Those who are skeptical academics never make their difference or get single point of academic is to tell the story of what actually happens and extend the Prosser evidence. Only withdrawing from the legal system solves infiltration fails. So the Prosser evidence says that we are the only things that sustain the sovereign apparatus, and by withdrawing it, we can jam its opportunity. We also don't need to pretend the state to know the tactics of the oppressor. We obviously have to understand opposing arguments and debate them. Their last petals card flows out. It says intellectuals can speak truth to power, not that we need to tell institutions what to do. Now I'm going to address their no advocacy text independent voting issue. We meet this argument. The entirety of the 1AC is the advocacy statement. There's no impact because we won't sever any of the 1AC. We adhere to that discourse as the advocacy. Their argument makes no sense because a method can't be calcified into a 5-second fragment of a sentence, 5-second sentence fragment that we pay no attention to. The entirety of the 1AC should be evaluated as an affirmation of the method. And there's also not a reason we don't get a it's also not a reason we don't get a permutation, because as long as we defend the entirety of the 1AC, so if we prove that their arguments are not mutually exclusive with those of the 1AC, that's not a reason that you should reject the affirmative for them. Even if we don't get a permutation, it's not a reason to reject the negative position. Asian counter-arguments. There's no link to the after. Any link of omission is infinitely regressive. There's just many forms of oppression. They didn't talk about in the 1AC. The narrative creates an oppression links which dissolves into argument of whose suffering matters more. Now, an affirmative ballot is key to credibility. 2 points versus credibility of our arguments. Ballots are this currency to make community the privilege of certain arguments and discredit others. Voting out signals recognition of our own violent discourse surrounding the war drugs. Voting against us dismisses our interrogation of sovereignty as insignificant, which replicates violent logic, and we control uniqueness. Alternative discourse surrounding the war drugs is not President Topic discussions. Now, the inclusion of Mexico relations advantages the claim to solve by cracking down on drug traffickers replicates sovereign logic. There's only a risk we find for some kind of inclusivity and understanding. Now, permutation of our methodology and all pulse of the alternative that aren't just vote negative, it's critical preventing the alternative from calcifying into a pure rejection. Now, their position doesn't attempt to solve for the affirmative of the entirety of the 1AC is offense against the collectivity is best. Jones and Campbell and 12 shift from high sense of self, the radically inclined toward the communities which will belong to critically minded people who move on the individual's location. Our alliance may not be always perfect. As critical scholars, we must find comfort in the messiness of elbow look and ourselves. Solidarity must be a firm shared belief that celebrates diversity, welcomes dissent, and rejoices in collective dedication. Their particularized counter method breeds passivity in the face of oppression and encourages essentialist understanding of identity and turns their impacts Alpino and 13 of the oppression limits of the grand strata who is more oppressed and less more correct identity from special and essentialist understanding of people from good sense of patriotism belief in the superiority of the wise middle staff often resistance of all tactics community. The most marginalized in the room will be used to substitute for developing critical analyses surrounding race, gender, class, sexuality, etc. This tactic is intellectually lazy, lacks political depth, and leads towards tokenization, and sovereignty is the controlling impact. It's the mechanism by which all forms of repression are deployed, including that of Asian bodies. This is not to say that all minority groups face these same problems, but rather the ability to draw a line in the first place enables particular problems. In position and conscientization as the endpoint of their method precludes real changes. Tuck and Gang 12 and other settler movement innocence is focused on cultivation of critical conscience to allow conscientization to stand for the more comfortable task over for the front-loading critical consciousness. Building can be a way of decolonizing the pursuit of critical consciousness. The pursuit of social justice through critical enlightenment can be a settler movement innocence diversion tactics in which believe guilt responsibility. Conscientization does not inherently offer any pathways that lead to decolonization. There's 2 clear instances of ableist language in the 1 and C that should be rejected. First, the Chain 93 evidence or racial minority pulling itself up from hardship. This ignores that disabled people cannot pull themselves up due to physical disabilities, which are independent exclusion. The DA exclusion is sent to their method of liberation. And second is their Dosage 7, and its conscientization involves a constant clarification of what remains hidden within us. While we move about the world, ableism is an oppressive structure of domination that must be rejected. Secrets are not oppression, always focus on how bodies appear justified in the attribution of inferior, somatic, mental, physical, figurative, disability, biological, imperative, disability, serves master trope of human disqualification, physical, mental properties, bodies, usually constructed as disqualifying, defects, integral, and present, symbolic requirements of oppression, every present system already oppressed identities represent some way as disabled. Ableism is qualities based mental and physical differences, selecting and stigmatizing those disabilities as racism, sexism, class, and false justification of human inferiority.
Okay, Brett.
It still answers their arguments in terms
15 seconds.
because these.
So that leaves us with 9:47. Let's first talk about ableism. Your first example was Asian pulling themselves up. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so we crossed that out in
Still
our.
read it.
I mean, you read blindness in your 1 2 AC.
Like, blindness isn't etymologically related to sight.
It's not.
I mean, I can read
You,
code that says that.
your Jones and Campbell card, you said must move beyond individual location. Like, are these not examples of ableist language?
No, because your argument is specific to moving about the world, as in like we physically get up and
Moving
walk
beyond
around.
the location.
Yeah, that's not something that's.
Must move beyond an individualized location is not just as ableist.
No, I don't think it is.
Explain the difference.
Because yours is literally about as we get up and move around the world. Moving beyond something intellectually is not the same thing.
Wait, moving beyond intellectually is not what conscientization is?
No, I'm at specific instances of discourse used in your cards. It's not just that you like moving, even if conscientization is moving beyond something intellectually, that's not the same thing as like describing like the way we move about the world.
Wait, you think that our card is saying we're physically walking around the world?
Well, physically moving about the world.
Wait, that's what you think it was?
That's what your evidence is in the context of. Our evidence is about like
going back onto counteradvocacy, you say that there's a uniqueness. Why is interrogating sovereignty? How does that break down the myth of the model minority, interrogate the oppression against Asian Americans?
Right, so our argument is that sovereignty is not like necessarily the terminal impact in itself, but rather it is the enabling condition for all the forms of oppression, like how you talk about.
Enable how sovereignty justifies the myth of the model minority.
What?
That's my argument.
Yeah.
Yes, sovereign logic is the one that perpetuates
Yeah,
that argument.
your argument is that the myth of the model minority is a tool of racism to forward violence. Our argument is that the sovereign's ability to determine life and deem it juridically valuable along the lines of race, class, and gender is the precondition for that to happen.
Like, the ability to literally
they want to
make
differentiate all those terms of
value.
life and determine which lives are better. Why does that justify the sovereign putting Asian Americans as a hardworking minority and putting their lives above other lives? Like,
Because
how does
right,
that
that's
justify?
still drawing a line.
Race.
Putting their lives above other lives is still drawing lines between them.
All right.
Our argument is that
Go on
we
to
reject
case.
the ability
You
to
say
do so
that,
in the first place.
You read this Sontag card on Boudreaux, can you explain to it? Why is using suffering uniquely good to your ethics of sovereignty?
Because we remain ignorant. Well, first of all, I said that we don't link to this argument because your card is describing like visual images, which is not part of the
I'm not
link.
questioning the link.
The Sontag card says that we can't just like ignore like suffering that happens in other places because then we don't do anything about it. There's a difference between pity and justice. That's
why are we
Sontag
doing logic of the police?
Because you're saying that you need to like give a static identity to us to like know where like who we are, like our location at all times is logic that the police can use to like be like.
Yeah, but isn't it the logic of the police that they don't have an identity and then they can just steal your identity, make you identify your identity?
I'm not sure what
No, it's like the politics of the confession is the strategy.
Crap, we have 9:47.
I'm actually
9:39 left.
so like 10 seconds. Yeah. We use 15 before prospect.
30.
So 9:35 or 32.
9:35. We'll close that.
Just missed. I went to
The black framework and then the case. Feel good?
Well said.
Alright. The role of the ballot is best methodological deliverance and first group. You have missed the bold and critique. This is a racial role-playing critique. Instead of just speaking out against the sovereign, you should actually have a plan and allow us to take the sovereign down. This is where the willing time is coming in. We need to infiltrate this institution, specifically conscious of reparation and advocate for it. You have independently dropped the reparation cause. The walking time says that we should be advocating for a strategy of reparation for those affected by this drug war. This is a concrete strategy that can be taken against the sovereign to take out. We will bankrupt the sovereign if we do reparation, which is the reason why the alternative solve the sovereign war. If we take away the power of the sovereign, also give power back to the people who will get the money from the reparation. This is an independent sovereign claim. Because he has the committee, no new money arguments because negative block strategy, praying confidence to AC, and doing that will make it unfair and abhorrent, especially because again, the entirety of blasphemy, it turns the crap out of the case. One is that we capture the guilty evidence fair, 3 warnings. One is that the guilty evidence says that what is important is the sovereign lead is war mission and his police efforts and the falseness law be dealt with. The altar is the only thing that deals with the sovereign lead. What is Bishop going to do? What do they do about the people of sovereign empires? What do they do about the drug cartels going there? These are all questions left unanswered in the conscience of the Wednesday. Now the second one is that the guilty evidence says that we must deactivate and destroy his mechanism. You do nothing to do that. The will is alternative does disparity because we infiltrate the institution. This is where the CIA comes in, because what the CIA did is they pretended to be the KKK, they invaded the KKK, became members of the KKK, and then they took it down because they knew exactly how the KKK operates. And this is a historical example of women's national. Now the third one is I also give an example of how a human rights lawyer led a human investigation on the question of journal to challenge sovereignty. This proved that sovereignty must be engaged at an institutional level. Now the second argument is you dropped all the racial term sovereignty arguments. Sovereignty that you could cross like these from the Asian counterfeit. Sovereignty is the mediated evidence. That's the only reason why sovereignty operates in this article is because of racism. Racism gives it the logic to indiscriminately kill people. That's the logical racism. That's how sovereignty just by killing people. Getting rid of racism is getting rid of sovereignty. The alternative to racism solves racism because this is where the Bush evidence comes in. I'll explain that a little bit more later. Now the second one is the Oklahoma evidence. The Oklahoma evidence simply says that structural racism is what lets sovereignty operate within the status quo. Now here's a couple of variants here. One is that the sovereignty cards don't line up with the total impact. The sovereignty mechanism doesn't do anything about the global biopolitical that the Gilly evidence talks about. We actually capture one's Gilly better. Now the second argument is that the act should not be offered because of violent states, except in the complex run by the drug cartels, not the United States federal government. That means the reason why the Ballot Turn doesn't apply to Ballot Turn. Now the third argument is that the Parker evidence says that the examination of Juarez as a state exception is important because the situation falls into both legal and theoretical examination. This means that they will solve because they have examined the court from a theoretical perspective, but not a legal perspective. Well, only an alternative set of reparation. Now the fourth argument is that them winning the state's ban is not offense against alternative because we agree that we just say that the same must be determined. You have to pick up and do level of it. Now this is where they actually miss the boat because they think that we're just an interpretation-based black man critique. This is a critique of your lack of political action. This is where the historical example comes in. Now the Counteract from Wednesday is about Václav Havel, who was a Czechoslovakian revolutionary. Czechoslovakia was the violent and totalitarian regime of Czechoslovakia was taken down in the Velvet Revolution. And this was only done because intellectuals stood up armed and framed the politics as Kelly's evidence says in order to take it down. This is an empirical example of when it was successful. The second example is the Haitian Revolution, the Toussaint Overture, or his way out to become a revolution. He led the battle. He was a great politician and combined the people to create a constitution for a black nation today. What is the end point? What happens after the alternative? These are all questions that the historical revolution and our alternative answers what the Wednesday does. Now the third example is South Africa. When Nelson Mandela was jailed, he came out and became president because he mobilized populations in order to actually infiltrate institutions, taking it out. The apartheid white institution in South Africa only taken out because of that action. Now political action also resolved the state exception, and the pluralistic nature of the U.S. prevents bad things from happening. That is mid to 2011. But the government overlooked this conversation with the government publicly meeting considered the same time the academic division began to speak out against the administration policy and administration. So public publicly, the government's warning witness hall because they Bush tried to peacefully type of hall. The government's correct that the rule design staying off in the dead Bush level possession that sounding great attack. Also, we need a clear strategy to take down the goal. Let's draw policy lines to the U.S. needs action strategy. The state goal of becoming U.S. policy not let's go. Plus make a team step and reduce harmful governance class and use policy. Recommend anti-federal marijuana prohibition. Right by they find a declaration of justice. Treating as drug issue. Blind ballot. They say that there's no link except they send a silence link here. This is a reason their performance is bad. They say silence and racial question better with the trouble where they incarcerate minority buyers. This actively perpetuates white supremacy because silence causes racism become the assumed norm. They whitewash the dark questions surrounding the subject of the one interrogation. That's where you correct the piece of question on it. This is where the Magnificent comes in because the Magnificent says that you must reject every single instance of racism or else you can have a theoretical practical approach any sort of problem. Also, the second link argument is that Agamben is depolarizing and his alternative fails. You must interrogate history. That is possible to I think Agamben's exception is something rule comes to serious cause. Even if Agamben's bringing available, they are depolarized sides. And reading this exception as the essential that races a rich history of social political struggles as well as possibly with individual religious games and everything. Now, he does not provide a prescriptive solution to overcome the state. That's sovereignty 2007. Agamben does not provide prescriptive sovereignty justice. Agamben points to contradict their theories of the state. Agamben does not provide the deal with political action that we not say overcome the state. Can we political action match the problem of Agamben 95? But these states are decision final political action commitment. Traditional policy having to say by displaying inquiry on television. Now, rejecting the state is usually bad in the country sovereignty only framework where people have a chance to have meaningful control of life. That is McCormick 2000. The freedom of expression, that's the words like the British flag, and the fact, but material circumstances must be linked to political classes. It's critical things you can pass between the states. Nothing at the moment you got to say can give the conscience of way. Institutions are controlled by states to welcome talent, to solving enterprise of conduct that case in each other world. The state represents the only framework that people have a chance for some meaningful control over their lives. Now, their depiction of the drug war as a failure is wrong. The war on drug was a success because the purpose of the war on drug was create a racial caste system, not to reduce crime. They paper over the true violent modes behind the drug war. That's Alexander 2000. Saying incarceration is the visual framework makes sense only if you assume that system is not a control problem. The massive incarceration also say race the system facts and said one country that law is already so crimes are not to create a racial crime. The drug fund, the political and legal rules of employee war drug. There's no freak action. Now these pieces now they say that the Woodson Avenue, they don't link to the Woodson Avenue. You definitely do link to the Woodson Avenue because Woodson Avenue is a racial crime society. The Woodson Avenue indicates that in the past the Negroes excluded from political history. This is why you need to have a political analysis. They're white states that defend the entire white state, defend the lack of a political strategy and lack of an analysis of state institutions within the white state, which is what the Woodson Avenue says. That's the logic of white supremacy because white supremacy prevents black marriage and black people in general from living by these institutions. This is where we gain the racial impact cycle code. You have also dropped the Carroll's impact beyond the way on to raising the Carroll's impact responsibility says that if you don't engage race structure, the diversity evil will take over. Yes, it's a seed of legal argument, but they have dropped the coming out cycle, which means that they lead to a choice that they tolerance cycle. Now they say discussion topic. This obviously doesn't apply because we're not interpretation based. We have the alternative. Now they say the steel evidence, because the steel evidence flows negative too, because it says that what the president needs is an intellectual who dares to remind him of the ability of power. Yes, you remind the president of the ability of power, but you don't tell the president what to do, which is what the Cal card is saying to do. You must bring the possible and consequences that all the arguments are against this. The Cal Steel card also said that the purpose of the academic is to tell the story of what actually happens. You tell the story of what's happening in the but you do not tell the story of what happens afterward, which is what alternative does, which is the reason why you can create an alternative. Now they say now they extend the preserver card right here, but the preserver card is not an app card. It says that we must restore all apparatuses to the possibility of the use of capture. This lines up perfectly with what Lewis said that said we can infiltrate criminal plan. Now this preserver card does make some pretty sweet claims, but has no prescriptive warrants. Why just talk about the story today? What is the alternative? What has the separate word for? All of these are questions that are left unanswered. Now here's a specific card. Only reformers can fail. So trying to accelerate the illicit to how to achieve nothing. That is celebrating to that Bible. It's entirely Bible leaders and hopes of the message over common institute ridiculous community. It seems our thing that in Godly capital, Robin Archaeological statements were gained, or retreats to the common positive gesture and 2020. We also affirm Agamben's question. The Bible and foundation will have coming to a utopian messianism. This suggesting these articles able to respond to Bible like we have actual learning. Now we have no other choice than reform. The reclaiming of their life and the possibility of having one is impossible without the establishment of alternative ethical human order, or else we will be swallowed up by Western globalization, possible United States modernity, first and tunnel the body around humanity and stupidity, there's a human same thing. Even though it's classical interpreting the universe, I cannot find picture this has to be sterility is the negation of the days, no guarantee that the bridging universality can be built. There are always sex resistance comes the same. Rejection of the project creating ethical human order. Reconstruction appears to be a more favorable that which is stable. Only these swallowed globalization problem institutes a recognition of failure of all institutions to deliver sacred goals. Made presence over reassessment to roll the state. Operation of trying to come to the cloud of the state and made pride important was entry to think that the wrong side well. Now I'm going to extend the M-spec arguments as another independent link. The M-spec arguments are reason why they didn't have the principal solution. They say they claim that the entire YC except the why not? Well, they have specifically reason for why the YC in the context of this debate fails and why their explanation and their display are wrong. Take some prep. Okay, if you open up the Twincy doc, read all of exposition solves and answer to just read everything on the case. Actually, I'll just give you a quick one. You have to read on this one. I'll get time for camera, so you still answer your questions about it. Alright, cool. I'll send it to you.
Okay.
You can cross it.
Right. Okay. So, I guess why should you, Michael, be telling the government what to do from this room at Harvard University?
Because that's the way we as intellectuals start to get a strategy to break the government down.
By telling them what to do and thinking we did things?
Not thinking we did things. We are doing things.
You seem to think that
do.
doing that in this round is a good thing, so why?
Yeah, because this is debate, yo. This is where we argue where some types of actions are good ideas. This is where you challenge
Are the only productive actions like government engagement actions?
What did you say?
Are the only productive actions ones which engage the government?
Not exactly engage the government, but
Okay,
we're
so
saying this is the more productive way. We're not saying everything else is unproductive. We're saying this is the most productive method.
Okay. How does Steele? I was like confused in your analysis of why the Steele part flows negative. Sort of related to this. You said like Steele says we should remind the president of the brittleness of power. I don't understand why you think the negative does that more than he did.
Well, first, you remind them of the brittleness of power, but you don't tell the president when he needs to change.
Where does Steele say that we need to tell the president how we should change? Steele says, in fact, the exact opposite of that, and that we should not tell the
first,
president
there's no warrant for why you should tell the president change, and second,
there actually is a warrant where we should.
The entire critique is a reason why that's better.
Okay, fine. I just don't think the Steele evidence actually flows negative. I think you just asserted.
No, I think
how does racism from beginning to end, how does racism enact violence?
Racism is the logic of
Right, I understand what it is.
based off
Right,
of
I understand
who
what it
they
is.
are.
What's like, so what is the process by
the
which
state
that
is allowed to be racist. It lets the state harm minorities.
Doesn't the
based on-
don't minority groups first have to be distinguished as like different before they can be like considered, I mean, worth killing?
Yes, except
like
what's the
able
point?
to be
They
killed.
need to be distinguished as different, which is why there's this.
Yeah, so why is that distinguishment is different in instance of like sovereign logic and not one of just like, I don't understand why racism precedes the drawing of the line in the first place.
Because the drawing of the line is not just sovereign logic. Sovereign logic is the logic that there's someone that controls us. Yes, even if someone controls us,
Sure.
they don't have to be necessarily bad.
Who's the one that well, so, we have a little more nuanced definition of sovereignty. It's the ability to determine life and death. But who is the what like? Or actually, that's fine on that question. The Mitzen card. It says that it says like some quotes from the card are that ruler could decide to stay in office but like rulers like Bush didn't, which proves that popular sovereignty remains intact. I'm not sure why this is an answer to any part of
There's a difference between biopolitical sovereignty and
this?
popular sovereignty. You say biopolitical sovereignty is bad, where the government gets to control whatever the hell they want.
Our definition of sovereignty is the ability to determine life. Okay, I just
No,
don't
this is what
understand-
your 1EC definition says. I don't care what you say, but this is what your 1EC says.
No, I have.
The Michigan card makes a difference, saying that popular sovereignty is not the same.
So
type of
just the fact that we have
sovereignty.
like term limits on presidents means that there's no like.
Yes, that is an
sovereignty.
example of how sovereignty can't just
Okay,
kill
but
that
why
person.
doesn't the violence that results from like U.S. imperialist project disprove that those checks are effective?
What violence from
Well, like-
imperialist project? These are questions that the 1EC doesn't answer.
Drugs.
Hey, I put it in the Dropbox.
What is it called? One in our cards?
Yes. So we'll take a little bit of prep.
Wait, what?
Because don't you have to put it in your speech there?
Flashing over right now.
Okay, that's cool. I guess no problem.
I mean, those cards are already in the 2 speech, right?
No, a couple of them more. Okay, we'll take a second. This song. First of all, it's going to be 2 songs. The first song's going to shoot. That's 8 seconds.
You had 919 before.
Yeah, please write it down. I'm not.
9/11?
You get how many seconds?
9/11. They have 9/11.
It's gonna be where the 2 and 2 left off. And then the
Okay, there's case. There's case.
where?
The stuff I gave you is case.
So am I starting from
You count out the left and on case, then you count it over.
it's gonna be life framework, case, then the counteradvocacy. So what I'm ready.
We are not powerless as intellectual, we contain indifference to opposition, kettles and knives. We are not powerful, hateful, that is single, that is uniquely powerful, and prefer who definitely not have great power, co-ordinated, invisible, initiative, energy, transfer for the structure, and purple for the war, the best cannot afford to, a different distinct between morality and power, negotiated by anyone who tries to change for inside the political system, hateful, anti-political politics, practical morality, so much to not taking the power, and manipulation, not a struggle. We are presented through debate, teaches us the technical language, and physics by decision maker. This is the only way we can learn to translate our experience into solutions. Step by step, in 2000 pulse man is more than laws of arguments that specifies how institutional interest of policy, people changing the world means changing the rules. We can't we know just without contesting policy and answers. No one don't know for people of color. Well, for youth development comes from alcohol, tobacco, back into policy written by demand workers request struggle with the bureaucracy, technical language, difference by decision maker. We need to develop capacity for transfer our informative data and experiences and solution. Now you can go into case. They have isolated two mechanisms of solvency. We will destroy both of them. First, it's exposition, solve nothing, and Bishop Guertin has been running this ad every tournament. We all know that these drug wars such that warrants in a state of violence, except in Breaking Bad solves your offense for Pete's sake. The alternate solves because inviting a debate for different methodology makes it so that every exposition is in the context of classical method that can be weighted and evaluated. The way we have exposed the hunts of the drug war is uniquely useless. Their principle is does not introduce new forms of knowledge production within the debate. They introduce going through music, personal narrative, or anything else. The video suffering from the drug war as from the drug war at pawns in the home for the balance, their wood form of intellectual violence cross-applied the Mojo card. They want to see now, they say they break the rules. Mission into a special snowflake. The break currently has multiple teams that break the rules. Different forms of performance they don't. The one is just a bunch of cards are read quickly with no different forms of knowledge production. The alternate solves. Even though we advocate engaging state institutions, this is not a traditional framework violation where we say you have to follow the rules. We advocate for a productive play, one where you can do as you please, but you propose but the purpose should be to create concrete change. This card is also not specific to the drug war, means that any integration power should be sufficient to solve, which means a one in speech that captures this war. Now there's no impact to bear like Bibles have been less dangerous within the president because they've been cursed of unity, the plurality nature of culture has been given away for diverse identification that prevents a single nation from controlling all populations. That's the short impact card. Now, even if that's not happening in Juarez, it does not matter. This is defense to your Gully evidence, which claims global extermination by sovereign. That's not happening. They should not be able to garner their Gully evidence because that's not. They do not have a reason why interrogating Juarez specifically brings out the global biopolitical regime, nor a reason why the students accept it. And Juarez will go now go into the Asian counteradvocacy first.
I think I'm gonna cover Michael.
First they say no, like you can cross-apply all the races of the crucial cards from the 2 and 2 that's going to be also learning is that the myth of the model minor is a Centennial card from the 1 to see explains how Southeast Asian Americans were used as a justification for the drug party. Their mission of not using that is like a commission that should crucial evidence magnifies the second impact is using in their state of biopolitical regime. The biopolitics inherently does not look at life and death, but it actually papers over the differences within the race, especially the Southeast Asian Americans, which justify the drug war through the process of coloniality. They say they need balance for credibility. And currently, I don't know why that answers the Asian counteradvocacy. You will vote on negative to give us a credibility advocacy to break down the myth of the model minority. The union's arguments do not make sense in the context of the myth of the model minority, which they have conceived as an impact first. The impact is it causes psychological violence against Asian Americans who are always shut down abroad. Always the second impact is that it causes resentment between other minority groups and other persons. That means that you cannot solve for something when other groups that you collectively arguments talks about are bickering with self not being able to solve. That doesn't mean they get a permutation because this debate is a question of competing methodology. One issue should be a starting artifact in competition with one and two discourse role in choosing the concept of the debate with a methodology. Now, A is opportunity cost of permutation, or A is opportunity cost of government desirable to policy taken by the federal government because they do not defend such a policy of permutation no longer applicable. B is whiteness. The permutation is an artifact of traditional notion of the debate. They have said it was bad. This is dumb term. The performance of the one and C and recently they hold the same messed up knowledge protection. They criticize C as performative violence and permutation is a violent act by commodification of our identity as Asian Americans in this debate. Now the permutation way to scale and now hybridity scale oppression is tactile power lumps together all minor have one follow circular. Now they say collectivity is best answered by the permutation one and how one mind is always assimilated into this society. That's answered by the channel card from the 1AC. The passive arguments do not make today is when that oppression if we say we are using identity to critique it. Also it's not about our identity but our method of conscientization to be able to solve for that. Sovereignty is the biggest impact was the answer. The case for now the conscientization is not just it's not a coloniality. This colonialism argument is not just that because it's broken by conscientization. Ableism argument first apology we did not mean to use ableist language. Also the first example was out of context because we crossed that argument out. Recognize the labelist thing, but the second example is about moving around intelligence. It's a metaphor for our minds expanding, which is the same way the upper uses just as much as the ableist language. There's no by the right, like the Gully evidence is the movement of those who do not want to be dominated, who not without fact. It's another reason for ableist. Also, whiteness is the root cause of ableism, specific to that for ableism treated by those who define themselves able, not calling out for development. Whiteness contains multiple roots for race and ableism. Eugenics science has a heart of special education, psychology, and system service support for people with disabilities.
Work at disability.
9:13.
He was just like,
Yeah.
it's like a.
A few questions about our stuff.
Well, let's finish here. Okay, so what?
For our study.
Yeah. So, what is it? What's that? Other than just. At the bottom. Yeah, you can delete that. That's just. Don't worry about that.
Should I not read it?
No.
So, alright. And then I'm going to see
Case for counter-advocacy, and then
Whatever you guys do.
Okay. The role of balance who best activate agency disrupts sovereignty. They have not contested the thesis claim of bare life, which is that the ability to draw lines between the one Agamben calls the sacred and the bare life, the life, the void of critical value is the precondition for modern operation of violence as contextualized Biguli evidence describes the ability to sacrifice life along to race, class, gender, describes the way that violence operates in the status quo, which means we control terminating as modern forms of policy will continue to be violent in action. That question, which means the reformist arguments are non-responsive because they do not they simply reaffirm the category of bare life, which means that there is try or die for the affirmative. We have multiple solvency mechanisms and they really don't deal with their argument. Simply says simply relies on the idea that we're just throwing information at you. That is not true contextualized by the bill, but evidence indicates that our 1AC discursive criticism shapes how students interact with the world, which is probably the reason why we're not incompatible with their political solutions argument. They've also conceded the throwing argument. Maybe the goal evidence indicates that we need to resist sovereignty in the position that we've been thrown in, i.e. debate. They've not conceded the argument debate is militarized now. They have, yes, a good strategy for resisting. Perhaps if we become policymakers, not if we are debaters. Our argument is that only our form of personal and and local and individual criticism of sovereign discourse able to resolve that for militarized education debate. Their performance argument is nonsensical. Yes, we did. The one issue was a rhetorical and performative criticism of sovereign discourse in debate. They see no impact of bare life. This evidence about biopolitics, which is not the same thing as sovereign power. Sovereign power is the ability to enable death, to disqualify life. Bare life, biopower is the ability to promote life. The legal checks their evidence applies to does not apply to bare life because it's not deemed critically valuable. This is the only evidence they have in this question, which is not responsive. The tagline extend the Baudrillard evidence to concede we are not commodification, but rather the Sontag evidence indicates that introduction to sovereignty allows for a meaningful form of solidarity. Go to the Counteradvocacy page. They have not contested the theory of sovereignty well at all in this debate, which means their arguments why racism may be one motivation for the war on drugs is not good enough. Their evidence simply says that it might have been motivated by sovereign discourse. That does not interrogate the method by which that violence is operated, which only we can answer that question, which is the ability to determine life. That's all the Agamben evidence analysis I did on the case page. We don't paper over differences. The evidence indicates we can understand the differences within bare life. The ability to determine life describes a broader category, which we can understand the distinctions within that. Go to the permutation rate. First is that they did not extend a theoretical reason why we do not get the permutation. We get the permutation coalitions, which outweighs theory. They get links to the 1AC, which checks abuse. They concede the Jones evidence indicates collectivity is the only way to solve multiple forms of violence, which contextualize the 1AC's understanding of sovereignty, which is the only way to allow for an intersectional approach to no firms, turns into only impact questions in practice because mutual exclusivity of the methods is no longer relevant. We do not link to their opportunity cost argument because they did not extend a link to the 1AC. Second is that we do not link to their whiteness evidence because it assumes that we are severing the 1AC, which is not what we do. There's no link to commodification because the permutation is a coalition, not an adoption of you or taking away of your agency. Means we don't link to this argument. Not going for the volcano evidence. Means I do not need to win that the Tucking evidence of concede conscientization as an endpoint is bad because it fails to understand the materiality of sovereignty and allows for only decolonization as a metaphor, which is bad and results in passivity. No answer to this in the 1 and R. Not going for the ableist language debate, but we don't link to it. The Gully evidence is about political movements, not physical movement, which means that we don't link to this. Go to Black Framework. The role of that was extended on the case base. Their form of racial role-playing applies for no ability for debaters to challenge racist discourse and debate. Sure, they can provide solutions for the future. Does not explain how we should produce sovereign discourse in debate, which is through intellectualism, because debate is inherently space where we can only control knowledge. Now we have a couple dissents in our interpretation of their political strategy. First is all of our arguments about the theory of bare life, which is that the state of exception is what the state is grounded in. Now, absent the 1AC's foregrounding of that question before we prescribe a political institution is able to resolve the question of bare life. That's the argument the broad of evidence which is that only through a prior withdrawal can we understand the category of bare life and be able to resistance. The 1AC is not mutually exclusive with their arguments about infiltration, because their argument is that we can infiltrate the state and dismantle the modern form of sovereignty. Our argument is that is not a politics of reformism, which means that is not mutually exclusive with the 1AC, but there's no reason why we prevent that. Their argument presumes something that we are not. The alternative does not resolve anything because they all do not interrogate the basis of the state, which we have said is the formation of state of exception. More evidence of dominating homosocracy that's offered. The key by which very codes of political power than fail their research. The fact is that the realm of bare life begins to coincide with the political realm, the exclusion enter, and it begins to coincide with political the realm and exclusion enters on irreducible in distinction of the state of exception constituted as the foundation on which the entire political system rested. Everything happens along with this process by which the state makes power to the living being into its own specific object. There's no link to their silence arguments. They concede the Gully evidence for specifically foregrounds the question of race, which means we do not link to this argument. Second is that Agamben is not depoliticized. That was answered on the case page. We allow for agency. They're black. Their arguments about why we result in racism are about excluding education for blacks, which is not what the 1AC does. The water wasn't successful. The argument is not that water, yes, it was very racist and is succeeding the sovereign's goal for, but not the prescriptive policy goal, which means we do not link to that argument.
I have 9/11, right? That's what you're doing.
So what do you think?
A couple questions about
Let's go out.
okay. Everybody has this. We have 9 minutes. All right. Get over here.
This first one.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's okay.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Also,
Their social location. That's a Michigan card, right?
a recutting of
Yeah.
there. I'm gonna actually go look and watch the 2 hours.
Yeah, that's fine. Anyway, I'll work on these things. We'll work on these things later. This is tomorrow. I should focus on. He's working on it.
Yeah, it's just someone who's stupid.
Black framework counter-advocacy case. Hey, anyone not ready? Okay. The role of the ballot should be to methodological liberation of press group. Our methodology to infiltration, engaging and reforming the political to see how we should change into our own world. We also acting as intellectuals to create a revolution and order changes for institutions. Specifically in the context of this debate, we have an actual strategy for a challenge to drug war. Reparations, the walking clock indicates that we need to use public forums in order to speak out against the drug war. The harms and caused against black and brown bodies within and outside of the United States. This is a specific strategy to bankrupt the sovereign, to take away its power in order to actually break it down, which is the reason why we have the only alternative that's all. Now, the role of the debate should be a test of comedic methods. This is better because the debate should be in a space where we just talk about a prescriptive solution. The Weinstein doesn't meet this because they don't have the methodology. The Weinstein's not methodology because it's not a strategy that can be done by others or to join in action. It's not something that can be taken out of this space. It's not something that can be actualized within this space. This is better because it teaches us to be better advocates and to break it down. The Kel's evidence indicate that all the historical examples proves that we need to actually engage in political to do this, which means that the alternative has someone who win in the context of space. No, this is how we act in the debate space. Just intellectualizing is not enough. Our entire criticism and impact to that now, but we have two terminal impacts that I'm not going to handle well. The first impact is racial pragmatism. Once an emphasis says that if you don't talk politics and exclude those from discussion, that causes this societal racial scapegoating that happened in history when the black people were not allowed to learn about the Constitution. We too learn about the Constitution. We too engage in political strategy what to do this. The impact of the Ballot Turn evidence is racial preference. It is the family evidence that racism is a precondition of theoretical practical morality. A little bit more contradiction analysis. Now the second impact that was actually dropped is the piece of Cal's evidence. Cal's evidence says that all atrocity and that revolution would not have happened without the moral and political activism. These are called. They're going to destroy the human. They're going to cause people to die of hunger. They're going to cause people to go hungry. They're going to cause to die in greenhouse gases. All of these are external impacts that do that. Now we also turn the crime out case. Once they have dropped all the arguments for robbing, captured, guilty evidence barrier. The guilty evidence says that we need to actually deal with the sovereign. The alt is the only thing that deals with the sovereign. How does Bishop Guertin speak out in the YC to deal with the sovereign? How does it stop people from inquiring the sovereign? These are all questions that they do not answer, which is the reason why we're the only ones out. The second argument is that we have to destroy the activist mechanism. They do absolutely nothing to do this. So Williams does this barrier. They have dropped the CIA example saying that if we engage institution, it lets them take it down in the first place. The third argument is the argument about the guilty evidence saying that we need to actually engage institution. It gives an example of a human rights lawyer that engaged institution to take it down. Also, they have dropped all the framing issues because their sovereignty cards don't line up with the terminal impact. Do not give them their very life impact at the end of the day because the sovereignty mechanism does not do anything about the global biological war that the guilty evidence talk about. Also, the action not be offered because the biological they're talking about is in Juarez, not the United States federal government, which means that they're interrogation support. Also, the Parker evidence, this is the key framing issue. The Parker evidence says that the only way to interrogate Juarez successfully is from a legal and a political perspective and the theoretical perspective. You do theoretical, you don't do legal. Only the alternative type of status quo. The line he said that racial role playing doesn't lead to anything. The over sufficient answer. Now the dissents, the theory of parallax arguments are all answered by impact argument and the framing issue coming out of the only alternative interrogation right to sovereign's bad. Yes, I was covering sovereign's argument because the alternative interrogation by the sovereign's bad and the status quo. We actually have a strategy to act like this when the class go. Prior withdrawal is not critical because they have dropped the Brewster evidence says that messianic objectivism that the common Agamben Juarez institutions absolutely fail because the state institutions are inevitable and will never be hollowed out. The Williams evidence says that we attacked his plans nonsense to take this out, something that they don't do in the status quo. He said that the white state is not mutual solution. Way too many links you drop for these win argument. First, the Hussein evidence said the Agamben's conception of the state reception is depolarized because they eschews the historical analysis that caused revolution. This is why you should cross-play all the historical analysis I did in the 2NC that says empirically revolutions are only succeed because they engage in political. Now, the second argument is that Pastor Card says that Agamben does not have a prescriptive solution, which means that Agamben is contradictory. He cannot overcome the power of the state. This is where the drop and speculate will come in because they don't have a methodology that is actualized in the YC to do this, which is that you don't have a prescriptive solution. Now, the third way is the Prozar card. How the hell does it get any clearer? The Prozar card explicitly says that we must ignore the state institution. The piece of posture evidence that we read the line explicitly says that when we ignore state institutions, not the state institution, the negative protection of the state does not resolve the British universality. We must be linked to an ethical and humane new order. What do they do? What does the world look like after the YC is over? This was a question that was not answered once again. You also, Dr. McCormick, ever say that engaging material service as key. The Demon Nixon evidence contextualizing the consideration that we can engage policy work to change it. Now he says the alternative does not. All that reads Agamben evidence. The Agamben evidence is unique for this for us because yes, the state exception state might be bad right now, but we are not defending the state. We are defending a state which in the status quo. We say that the state is bad in the status quo. We agree with that. So we have an alternative that leads us to a different state, a state that can be replaced on an ethical humane order. Reason why it's over. We have also dropped that reparations. You completely saw in the status quo and all the historical analysis are reason why alternatives off. He said that there's no links to that. We're not going for that right now. He says that they don't actualize black identity. A piece of Cal's evidence said we cannot just play backwards role games. We need to actually actualize identity. The Asian currency, see the permutation. We're not going to go for just a separate competition. Now the case starts. We capture the role of the battle better because we're the only ones that actualize agency to sovereign. What does Bishop going to do? They've been running this staff every single tournament. Everyone knows that there's robber stocks. What is different about the YC that it makes them special snowflake? Absolutely nothing. You have to drop the internal link taking out to your guilty evidence that you should not access it because the global Bible, there's no reason why the state exception Juarez spills off to the global Bible war. We have a clear alternative that solves in terms of crap on the case because the many evidence says that racism is the warrant for why the Bible and the sovereign can be killed because without racism the sovereign can't do anything.
We had Eric down. 516. that's.
We're good.
Wait,
I'm not going to work. I'm just looking at the snow.
Can I use?
God damn, that's pretty.
It'll be the case and then the black paper. Anybody not ready?
There are multiple unanswered words for affirmative solvency in the 2 and R. That means they don't get 100% takeout. They conceded all debate education arguments that Mike makes, which is uniquely key. The ballot. The first is that our argument is that the ballot prioritizes knowledge. It is an inevitability of debate. They presume all of their arguments presume that debate is a neutral space right now, but it is not. It's militarized. Most discussions surrounding the war on drugs in Mexico boil down to something along the lines of this: the war on drugs is failing now. We need to increase economic engagement in Mexico to crack down on drug traffickers and solve the war. This only replicates the balance of logic, and it's the only education surrounding the area of the topic of the affirmative discussion that's occurring in the topic discussions right now. Even if reformism might be eventually good, we have to correct the problems of militarized debate education first by prioritizing the knowledge that the 1AC presents as a counter hegemonic discourse to this violent logic. It is voting affirmative giving us the ballot provides us with more social capital, giving credence to all of the affirmative arguments, which means giving credence to the affirmative arguments, which is a prerequisite to any disruption, which is a prerequisite to any disruption of sovereignty. Mike made this explicit claim in the one I already said that the affirmative is a prerequisite because we need to demilitarize debate education now in order for any sort of reformism or infiltration to be productive in the future, which means that even if they win this argument, they can't win immediate uniqueness for them. This ties in nicely with our Bilgen evidence, which says that the way that students discuss security and discuss securitized practices and militarism shape the world. They say that the way we talk about things prioritizes certain knowledge. If we think voting affirmative is a prioritization of our knowledge, which means that if they don't disagree with the fact that the fact that they have no fundamental case defense about the thesis of sovereignty, the 2 and R is problematic. Because if they agree with this claim, then you should prioritize knowledge at the 1AC presented. Finally, the Krosrov evidence says that the only thing that sustains sovereign institutions from functioning normally in the sense posed there our engagement with them and giving them credence by recognizing the engagement with them. The only thing that sustains their operability that we need to withdraw from them to render them inoperative. It doesn't necessarily mean that we get rid of the state because they conceded our argument that the state or government and that sovereignty are two separate things. Sovereignty is any logic that enhances the ability to determine life. This is not to say that we do not think there's the affirmative doesn't advocate any sort of form of anarchy per se, but it is an advocacy of the rejection of the ability to draw lines in the first place, which is fundamental thesis. They have an answer. Go to the critique. Reformism fails and it's inaccessible to use as students and debaters. The role of the intellectual is not to make policy prescriptions, but rather to speak truth to power, which is the Steele evidence telling the government what it should do. It just falls into sovereign logic because then they can co-opt the knowledge that we provide and then use it for mechanisms of control, which is direct. Quote from our Steele evidence initial. The Agamben part that Mike read in the 1AR says that the Agamben part Mike read in the 1AR says that we should not engage with the state as it exists now. We should not engage with the state as it exists now because it will always maintain sovereign logic and find ways to sustain itself, which ties nicely in with our Steele argument. All of our arguments about why debate education is a prerequisite answer this argument. They say there's 2 independent impacts, but no, this doesn't make any sense. This doesn't make any sense. They don't have sufficient impact extension. First is their independent racism impact. First, we control the terminal impact uniqueness because they have conceded that the ability to draw lines is the prerequisite for all operations of modern violence, which means that if we can disrupt the logic of sovereignty and debate, that we can disrupt some of the logic about racism. And there's also no link to this because their links were trying to get this card from 1933 just says that describes that telling blacks that they can't talk about the law. I have no idea how the affirmative does this. Just because Mike and I don't talk about the law doesn't mean we're making any prescriptions about what people should, what any particular group should be talking about. Now, the next argument is that we don't do anything to stop people from dying in Juarez. Well, sorry, newsflash, neither do you either. You have to balance realism with optimism. Our argument is that the negative method of our argument is that none of us can do anything directly affect the problems in Juarez now, but we need to analyze the underlying conditions of sovereignty, which only the affirmative does better. The negative method of critique may solve some of the problems associated with the drug war, either, but it is not a broader explanation of the functions of sovereign power. Mike did a good job on the one hour explaining why this analysis is key. The negative hasn't sufficiently contested the underlying impact framing that sovereign logic enables all violence, which answers this claim. They say the Parker evidence is about legal. It says we have to talk about legality and theory. The Parker evidence does not say that we need to prescribe policy solutions, just as we have to understand categories like state of emergency and the way that the law operates in order to maintain sovereign logic and other. They also concede a fundamental argument at the bottom of the 1AR that the infiltration and reformism are not the same thing, are not the same thing, even if we are, most of their alternative evidence is talking about infiltration of government, which isn't necessarily mutually exclusive with the affirmative. They didn't answer the flux argument that we should be able to adapt a strategy. People like Edward Snowden prove that we can still resist the government from outside while we resist the government while being infiltrated and we're not engaging within the sovereign logic that they do. None of their arguments about Prozorov are fleshed out sufficiently. And
You want to put document